I am Bambolo.
For years, I wandered many lands, a witness to the rise and ruin of men. For half a decade, my footsteps knew no rest until fate, in its quiet design, led me to a region consumed by darkness and undone by war. Yet, in the magnanimity of heart, and in the solemn pursuit of preservation over annihilation, I chose not to pass it by. I settled, not at the center of power, but at the quiet edges of its reach, where influence moves unseen and change takes root in silence. Through the demonstration of knowledge and the subtle exercise of wisdom beyond common measure, I was granted audience by the king, and in his grace I was entrusted with a task of great consequence: to shape the mind of his daughter, to instill within her the virtues of clarity, restraint, and truth, to guide her toward wisdom beyond her years. And she learned, perhaps too deeply, for in the end, she did not resist the tide of conflict. She surrendered herself to it, and in doing so, offered herself to the enemy, in the hope that her sacrifice might bring an end to war. Ooh, how did I Bambolo err?
A very long time ago, there existed two villages, Amokpu and Amakpa. These two villages were always at war with each other. Their hatred ran so deep that peace seemed impossible. The fighting became so intense that a few years before this story began, the elders of both lands agreed to draw a great boundary, stretching from one end of the land to the other. It was a strict line that no one dared to cross. A law was declared: anyone caught on the other side of the boundary would be left at the mercy of the enemy. Fear settled into the hearts of the people, and the boundary became more than a line. It became a warning. King Ezinne, the ruler of Amokpu village, had a daughter, Ezinne. She was his only child. Being the king's daughter, she was raised with care, but also with great expectation. It was also around this time that the people of Amokpu began to notice a stranger. No one could say exactly when he arrived. He simply began to appear at the market, beneath the trees, along the pathways, as though he had always been there. Naturally, suspicion followed. Who was this man? Where had he come from? When he was invited to the palace, he did not flinch. He stood calmly and spoke. I am Bambolo, a man who has walked through many lands and looked upon many people. I have seen villages that flourished and villages that fell. And in my observation, it is never the soil that determines the fate of a people, but the wisdom they choose to carry or to abandon. I come from a place far from here, a place whose name would mean nothing in your ears, for distance is not measured only in footsteps. I came because I was drawn, as water is drawn downhill, not by compulsion, but by nature. Bambolo, somewhere between 30 and 40 years of age, possessed a rare gift. He understood herbs, healing, and the hidden workings of the body. There was no poison, no venom from any creature that Bambolo could not cure. His medicines were powerful and his knowledge ran deep. Yet, whenever he healed someone, he would always say the same thing: go and thank the gods. Do not mention my name. Because of this, his fame never spread openly. Still, whispers of wisdom moved quietly through the village. But Bambolo was not only a healer, he was also a teacher. Every day he gathered children under the great mango tree in the village square. There, he taught them wisdom, discipline, and truth. He had a special way of reaching into their hearts, calming their stubbornness and guiding them towards good character. Parents were always amazed. Children who once misbehaved returned home changed, more respectful, more thoughtful, and wiser than before. Because of this, many parents were grateful for Bambolo, even if they could not openly praise him. As Ezinne, the king's daughter, grew older and came of age, King Ezendo began to think deeply about her future. He wanted more than luxury for his daughter. He wanted her to be wise. So he called for Bambolo. The king brought him into the palace and gave him a task to teach Ezinne the ways of truth, wisdom, and understanding. And so Bambolo began to instruct the princess. Bambolo continued to teach Ezinne as she grew. He taught her about culture, about the ways of their people, and about the gods. He taught her morals, how to live rightly, how to think clearly, and how to treat others with fairness. Ezinne listened closely. She was a curious child, always asking questions, always eager to understand more. One day, as they sat beneath the mango tree, she asked a question that had long rested in her heart. Uncle, if everything you teach is true, then why are we at war with Amakpa? Why have so many of our people been killed? Bambolo was silent for a moment. He sighed softly and looked into her eyes. Human beings do not always choose what is right, he said. Within all of us, there are desires that can lead us astray. Greed, pride, and a hunger for things that do not matter. He paused before continuing. The heavens do not separate people into good and perfect evil. There are good people, and there are those who do wrong. But it is our duty to correct what is wrong. Ezinne listened quietly. It is people like us, Bambolo added gently, who must bring an end to such calamities. What neither of them knew in that quiet moment beneath the mango tree was that those very words, spoken so softly, so simply, will one day become the spark that lit a fire neither village could ignore. From that day on, his teachings deepened. He spoke often about peace, how it brings growth, unity, and progress. And he reminded her that war, no matter how justified it may seem, always leaves behind destruction. Ezinne carried his words in her heart. Years passed and she grew into a young maiden of 15. One day, a great festival was held in the village. It was a sacred occasion. Ezinne was to be escorted by royal handmaids to the river bank, where certain rites would be performed for her. No man was allowed to follow them. Even the priest who oversaw the ritual was a woman. The maidens adorned Ezinne beautifully. Vermilion markings were drawn carefully upon her foreheads, forming intricate patterns that marked her royal status. Beads rested gently around her neck and wrist, and her garments were finer and more elaborate than those of the others. Together, they made their way to the river. The ritual was completed in silence and reverence. Blessings were spoken over her, and the waters were called upon to favor her future. When it was over, they began their journey back, but along the way, Ezinne suddenly stopped. I need to do something, she said quickly. Before anyone could question her, she turned and ran. The handmaidens were startled. Princess! They cried, rushing after her. Ezinne ran farther than they expected, moving quickly through the land. In their panic and pursuit, none of them realized what had happened. They had crossed the boundary. They had entered Amakpa. After some distance, the handmaidens finally caught up with her. They were breathless and shaken. The head maiden, a woman of about 30, tried to steady her voice, though her displeasure was clear. Princess, she said firmly, you carry the hope of our people. You must not act so recklessly. You are no longer a child. Ezinne lowered her gaze slightly, but before she could respond, voices echoed from nearby. Who goes there? The maidens froze, and the trees emerged young men. From the trees emerged young men, barefoot, their bodies marked with simple chalk lines upon their cheeks. They wore only short clothes tied around their waist, reaching just above or around their knees. Their appearance was raw and traditional, their presence intimidating. The maidens trembled. They pleaded for their lives, their voices shaking with fear. The young men looked at them carefully. Then, after a brief exchange among themselves, they made a decision. This girl stays. The rest of you can go. One of the maidens began to weep. No, please take any one of us, but not our princess. So she is the princess, the same man continued. A dirty smile adorned his stern face. Then let me repeat myself. The princess stays. The words struck like thunder. The handmaidens gasped. No, please, they began, but it was useless. You will return, the young man continued, and tell your people what had happened. Tears streamed down their faces. Reluctantly, painfully, they turned away with heavy hearts and trembling steps. The three maidens ran back toward their village, sorrow weighing them down, and Ezinne was taken away.